I'm joined today by Mehdi, and Mehdi is the founder of Facilitator's Corner and the creator of the workshop deck. This episode is going to be, I'm going to throw initial questions to you, Mehdi, and then we'll just see where it goes. But we're really focusing on workshop design, how you might be designing workshops. To give us a little bit of greater framework, though, if you would describe, what would you describe when you say workshop? What do you mean?
Yeah. Hey, Phil, super happy to be here. Great question, because there are there are so many definitions of workshop, and the more I met other facilitators, the more I realized that we are not always speaking about the same thing. So the way I see a workshop is basically there is the word work. So it's where the group really needs to create or achieve something. So it's really the type of that are more outcome driven, and I see myself as someone creating the process for guiding this group to achieve their outcome. And the outcome could be to align on a new strategy, to solve a problem they've been stuck on, create a better ways of working within the team, launch a new service, whatever is the goal, and whatever when it makes sense to actually have a workshop with different perspective, etc. Hope
And
it's
in
more clear.
and in terms of the physical space, are you talking about like in a boardroom setting? Are you talking about an indoor setting? What's kind of the places you're going to perform these workshops?
So yeah, usually, like, of course, I don't like boardroom setting, but the budget of clients are becoming smaller and smaller. So it will be whatever it's possible. I'm mostly working with corporates. So those tends to be those meeting rooms. If sometimes we're lucky and it's a very nice weather, but I'm in Belgium, it's often raining. So I'm not going to use the outdoor as much as I wish, but sometimes I do. And it's like, as I can imagine, it's quite stimulating for the creativity and other stuff.
So when we now look at the design, and I get these questions often around like how do I structure
Hmm.
a workshop or a training or a lesson that might be leading, like the structure is important. If you were to equate the amount of hours of the actual program, so let's say you were doing an 8-hour program, how much time are you spending on the workshop design versus the actual program itself?
It's a very tough question, because it really depends on the type of workshop. But I would say in general, it takes me half a day. And in the half a day, I see the design of what I put in the session, but also preparing the content and the small details. It used to be way more than that in the past, of course.
Yes, and I was going to say, like, maybe that's a portion of the experience. My guess is you have set templates. There's something interesting, and I wonder, this is a maybe philosophical thing, but with your workshop deck, I think there are 28 activities. You've framed in a way of saying, like, you don't need to know 100 plus activities. And it's interesting because it aligns with a book that I helped author called Tinker, which was the idea that we put, I think there's 25 activities, but the front matter essentially says you don't need to know hundreds
Oh,
of things. You need to know 25 things really well. And by knowing those things really well, you can adapt and tinker with those pieces to meet any group that you ever work with. Is, is that something that you also came to a realization through the time that you spent designing workshops and the refining of those? Do you actually kind of realize, like, I don't need to know hundreds of things. I just need to know the things that I'm good at really well. And is that something that you would recommend to facilitators as they go into this industry of like refining rather than knowing all?
man, this is just such a powerful insight that you're just sharing, more than a question, because I totally agree with you. When I started the journey, I had this feeling like, it's like workshop activities like were Pokemons, and I needed to catch them all. And like, oh, the more activities I know, the better I would be for any type of situation. But what you realize is that if you have the right activities from the start and you understand the why, which I think a lot of people just like see this as a template, don't understand the logic behind. So it's difficult to adapt it to the situation you're facing. So if you have like very simple activities that could fit different type of context, and you understand why and when you can use them, you don't need more than the 28 I mentioned it. And and actually the list can be even shorter. It really depends again of your style and the type of context. But yeah, I would say like the less the better, the more comfortable you will be with them. And it's really about like the simplicity of the activity, because as you know, the more complex it is, the more time you will take to explain it, the more the more risk you will have that participant don't fully get it. So they will not give you the right outputs. And on top of that, it will consume a lot of mental energy to understand the complex instructions.
Yeah, I used to have a just constant desire to grow the activity list. I love that you talk about Pokemon in that way, like got to catch them all, because I was collecting books, activity books. Like most of
Mm.
my early facilitation was just I'm bored with this activity or I want a new activity, and then how do I learn some new ones? And I'd go to conferences and I'd learn all these things. So my brain was just full, but I didn't have yet the skill to use them in an effective way. I was just kind of like rattling them off. I think now as well, when I write an agenda, I might have in a day 5 to 10 activity ideas and they'll cut them down. Whereas if I'd have gone for an 8 hours when I first started, I'd have put 100 activities down because I wouldn't have known how to fill that time. So that's maybe the next question I have for you is like, there's the activities. And I think that's the easiest part of design sometimes is putting in an activity and saying this is the goal. The harder part, I think, is the in-betweens, the reflection, the use of the activity, the purpose. How do I stretch a 5-minute game into an hour-long discussion that leads to meaningful growth? Like when you're designing workshops, how much are you putting into the in-between versus the activities themselves?
Wow, this is very interesting question and a complicated one. So the way I see it is like really, if you want to design a good workshop, you need first to understand best what is the outcome the client wants to achieve. So when you have the clarity on the outcome, which is always hard to get because clients don't really know what they want, and like you need to ask a lot of questions. And once you have that, it's easier to design your session, and the activities are just vehicles to get there. So meaning I get into the activity, this is the vehicle that I'm going to take. But if I see if I'm not going to the right direction and I need to ask more question in a certain part of the activity, or sometimes even forget the activity, this is how I will assess if I'm good enough to move to the next step. So the way I see it, like you have the final outcome, you reverse engineer from the final outcome. So you will have intermediary outcome. And then the activity is just my way to get there. And then I will quickly forget about the activity and just assess based on what I have. So did the group give me what I needed to move to the next step? No, then I need to work more. And can I just like, do I need to ask other question? Do I need to connect dots? Do I need to change the way the group perceive the thing because they are blocked? Or do I need to pull something, another activity because it didn't give me what I was expecting to get in the first place?
And it's a classic facilitator strategy, but your use of analogies is, I like these a lot. So you're talking about like the vehicle, the activity being the vehicle, and it's almost like instead of the activity being the driver, so it's not the
Mm.
person actually going, it's just the mechanism by which we get to a destination. And therefore, you probably sometimes like the vehicle may break down, like it doesn't do the task, so you have to get into another vehicle. Like you're looking at the goal versus this is the activity that will meet the goal. This is just an activity to hope get us closer to the goal.
Exactly. And this is why I came back to this, like understanding the why of the activity, because at the end of the day, this is why we don't care about activities. The more important is like being able to understand the final destination, understand where I need to go through to get there. And then I can just embrace the conversation, the insight from the client. But I get that it's difficult when you're starting the journey to, okay, but how do I do that? And this is where the activity helps a lot, especially when you're at the beginning of the journey. You know, you did your homework on the workshop deck, so first makes me happy. But why did I start and created this tool? Is because when I was teaching facilitation to corporates, to my clients, I was teaching them about what I believe what was the most important. So how do you facilitate a group, like the techniques you will use? And then I was talking about the anatomy of a good workshop, so what you should have there. But I never talked about the activities. And then all the question I was getting most of the time is like, okay, yes, got it. But which activities do I use, and do I know, and how do I know if it's a good one? And this pushed me to create this tool. But I think like at the end of the day, and I've worked 10 years in consulting. So in consulting, you know, our clients, they love methodologies, framework. What is most important is like just human logic. Like, why am I doing this? What is the problem? How can I get there? And there are so many different ways to get there. So just pick the one that makes sense in your context with your clients and read the room.
I often think that maybe, and it's hard to tell because I've been through this journey. I am the person I am now because of the things that I've done in the past.
Mhm,
But I often do think as someone who, and I teach facilitation as part of my job. So I'm teaching new people
mhm.
how to do this. And I've really struggled with this idea that I think what we do wrong, one of the things that we do wrong is that we teach the activities first, and then we try to overlay a purpose or a framework on top of an activity versus what we probably should do is teach the activity second, teach a framework and the idea like you've referenced first. And that way people don't get stuck on the activity serving a goal. They say, this is the framework and this activity helps in this moment, or I can take this activity and move it to another one. The reason I think about that in the US, I don't know if it's the same in Belgium and in Europe, but sometimes the activity, the tools get called props. I'm going to take this facilitation prop. The problem with the word prop is a prop is something to carry someone, right? Lift someone up, use it to lean on. I don't think the activity should be the thing you're leaning on. You shouldn't rely on an activity. The thing that keeps you up is the framework, and the activity is just a tool that I pull out of a bag and start using again. So I think like the language we use is important. What's your thought on like the idea that maybe we're learning the wrong way round?
I think you're totally right, and even though I told you I keep having those questions, and I created this tool, so from a marketing strategy, when I give this type of training, I should just focus on teaching the activities, but I'm not. I still believe that I have a limited time with those clients because usually I don't have a lot of time. So I'd rather focus on the fundamentals. And then if you want to, and if you understand a bit like the logic of what is the activity and how it will get you where you need to go, then I mean, the internet is your friend. You will be smart enough to pick the right one. But I think first focus on like again, I would say the facilitation techniques. So how do you guide the group through the discussion, and then how do you design a logic step by step process that will get them to the outcome? And of course, if you have more time, like if you have like a week with them or a couple of days, sure, you can talk about some activities. And to come back to why I think as human and the way that you see it in a lot of training in different field is that people are used to learn about tools, you know? Like, now we are talking about AI, all the things like the big hype was like, how can I prompt properly? I have a tool. How do I maximize the use of the tool? But if you understand more like, okay, what am I trying to get? Like, how can I get there? I think having those insights is more interesting to use AI properly instead of just learning like the hacks. I think like again, like to take another analogy, if you don't know how to swim as a kid, like having the small floaters is useful. It's not just useful, it's needed. And then, okay, when you get to, okay, now I'm in the water, I can be in the water. So now I can learn the rest. And when you learn the rest, then you can remove the flutter. And I think, again, we've been so far in this journey that we forgot about how it was. So I think like this is why people still need those flutters in the beginning. And then after, you're right. If I want to be a better swimmer, I need to remove them. I don't need this anymore. And I need to focus on other stuff that are more important.
Yeah, no, I love that idea of like once because you could, and you can sometimes see those where like the floaters just kept on too long, right? The kid can swim, take them off. But if you keep them on too long, then they become like a psychological protection as well as a physical, and they become relied upon.
Yeah.
And now it's like, I couldn't do it without it. And it almost needs that stretch. I was actually talking to someone this morning. There was a newer facilitator asking for advice. And I was just saying that I think there has to be some stretch in his growth. And one of the stretches I said is submit a workshop to present at a conference, an in-person conference. The reason I felt like that was a good stretch for them is because when you go and present in front of a conference, you don't know how many people are going to come into that room.
Mm.
And so the unknowns of the numbers, I do think helps you figure out like other ways to work with people. Like you need to craft a design where it would work for 2 people to 500 people and anywhere in between. So it's like sometimes you need those stretches. And if we don't do that, then and that's built into the design. If you're not designing for your own self to also grow, I wonder if that does you and your clients a disservice. Let me ask you this in line with that. How often are you putting into your designs for clients that maybe have paid however much they've paid, and you've got that internal pressure of delivering a high quality product. How often are you putting in new things into that you haven't used before to stretch yourself and grow? When do you get to practice new stuff?
The answer is at every workshop. Well, like again, like I did some stand-up comedy. Needed to stop because I have kids. It's like if you have a gig that works, it works. So it's not interesting for you to just always use the same jokes. You want to add some variation. Maybe I will add a longer silence. Maybe now I will do, I don't know, a callback. So I've learned this thing, like I want to always experiment stuff because first you keep it refreshing for yourself. You keep adding new stuff in your toolkit, and this is also how you grow. So I will say all the time. But the thing where I may disappoint your listeners or your viewers, it's not a big thing. It will be a different connection activity. It will be a different small thing, like maybe the way I will do the break. But I would say the core activities I'm using, it's often the same, I would say. Again, because I do the same type of facilitation. Imagine like the other day I was launching a new department, 150 people. Because of the context, and it was more like change management approach, there I took another, like it was a totally different workshop that I'm used to, because it was needed. So I said like, in the beginning you said like, but I was getting bored, so I needed another activity. You think like all the best singer, they do this crazy tour like with 60, 70, 100 dates, and it's always the same playlist. You don't think that they're also bored. But my clients expect a certain result. I know how to get to this result like almost for sure. So should I put this in danger just because I'm bored of doing the same thing? And again, it's just a vehicle. So the discussion is going to be different because it's another challenge. It's another group. It's different people. So even though it seems like the same thing, it's not.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's that concept of the why. Who's it for? Is the workshop for you because I need to entertain myself in my day, or is it that I'm aiming towards a goal? And if an activity would unlock that potential, then why would you not choose that best activity? Why would you put it aside for something different just because you wanted to try something new? I used to run a workshop at a conference. It was called Try Something New. The intent was I was going to run a 19-minute workshop with activities I'd never done before. The purpose was twofold. One, that people might get new activities, but the second was to see my reaction to how and to talk about what the experience of doing stuff for the first time is like. Because I wanted to, now, do I recommend doing 90 minutes? It was a perfect example for me to do it because I'd framed it to say, the reason I'm doing this is so no one was upset that I was trying something. Oh, you've never tried that? No, I told you I wasn't. So that ultimately served a purpose to me, but I certainly wouldn't be changing up an entire agenda. Mehdi, I'd love to, if we could, in terms of like design, workshop design, I know that you have, I think you call them the 6 C's, and it follows like a strategy of how you might help design. Do you want to give a shortcut to what those are and maybe give some examples of those along the way?
Yeah, sure. But first I want to react to what you said. Like I really love the fact that you give this workshop and then you had the meta of like demonstrating the purpose of the workshop by doing it live. I mean, like, what a better way to get people on board if you're willing to do it yourself in the first place and in a way more difficult
and I will
situation
tell you,
than them.
half the activities flopped. And they were disasters. So I was glad I did it with a safe audience where they were like, hey, did that work? And they were like, no, that didn't work. All right, well, moving on, next one. I'll try something else.
So to come back to the 6 C's, so it's called the 6 C framework. It's original from AG and Smart. So I think you had Rebecca on the podcast, but like basically came up with a book called The Workshopper Playbook, where they explain that in every workshop you will have 4 C's. The collection phase, where you set up the scope of the workshop, you gather all the information you need. And this is really about building the common understanding of the situation, having the high level view from every perspective. Then you have the choose phase, which is the second C. And this is where like, okay, I cannot do everything at the same time. I have this huge problem. I need to break down the problem. What is the most interesting to focus on with the time I have and with the people I have in this room? Then you have the creation phase, the third C, which is basically the classical brainstorm that you will have in session. This is quite straightforward, I would say. And then you have the commit phase, which is, okay, this is nice to have come up with good ideas to solve the problems we decided to focus on. But how do we ensure that real actions are taken? And this is where you come up with an action plan, a roadmap, things that where people are going to commit to some type of achievement. And in the community, together with other people, I was not the only one. We added the first C, which is connection. So we want to connect before getting into the content. And the last C, which is celebration. It's a nice way of saying, like, okay, you want to wrap up the experience that the participant came experienced, and you want to bring that clarity of everything that was important to them. Because when they're going to leave the room, they're going to go back to real life, the Monday morning full of emails with a bunch of notification on Teams. But we spend the time in this workshop to come up with ideas and to finally solve the problem. So we need to make those things happen. So we want to help with that, and in the celebration phase, we make sure it happens. I can break it down with an example just to
Please.
to make it more simple. So imagine I want to improve a recruitment process. Okay, big. Like, I'm working for this small agency. We are struggling to recruit new talents, and the people we have in the process are not matching. So what I would do is, like, first I do a connection activity. It's not a must, but it always helps. And there have been studies to show that it will help in creativity and productivity. And if it can be linked to the recruitment process, it's even better. So, people are sometimes just doing fun activities for the sake of fun activities. You don't want that. So if you can have a link, an activity that is very cool for that, it's called Why It Matters. So you ask people, like, why do you think it's worth spending the time on this challenge from your perspective and then from the group perspective? So it's a cool one to create a shared purpose around the workshop so that you don't need to convince them about why is it important. They reflect about it. The second C, collection. All right, we have all those problems in the recruitment process. Let's visualize them. Let's understand them better. Let's see which ones are really, really making it difficult for us to recruit. So we will have all the information in front of us because we want to visualize and we want to make it easy to digest. Because in this workshop, I will have Phil, that is a recruiter, an expert in the process, but I will also have a HRBP. I will have a hiring manager. And those guys, they don't have the same understanding of the situation. So it's really important to bring this understanding so that people understand it very well and they can actually contribute to the workshop. There is a reason why they are there. Then you're going to choose, okay, we have all those problems. We only have 3 hours today. What is the problem that is most important to focus on? And it can be a specific problem, like, I don't know, the job description is the job description the problem, doesn't answer the right profile. Let's focus on time on that. Or if you have more time, it could be like, okay, you visualize the process and you see that the 2 first part of the process have a lot of issues. Let's focus on the 2 first part. Then comes creation. It's going to be a bit long, but I'm almost done. Then you have creation. Then, okay, now we come up with ideas to solve the problems we prioritize in the choose phase. And usually when you have a bad brainstorming, in my experience, you look the ideas and, like, this is not going to do the thing I promised the client to do. In my experience, it's because you didn't spend enough time on the collection and the choose phase. So you don't have this shared understanding. So people are not able to connect the dots and to come up with the right idea. So this is why, the classical brainstorming, okay, guys, we have 1 hour. Let's find ways to solve and improve the recruitment process. What? I don't know. I don't understand very much the recruitment process, or not in the details. I need more information to be able to come up with the right ideas. Then we have commit phase. Okay, we've come up with a bunch of ideas to improve it. What happened next? In 2 weeks, Phil is going to do the idea number 1. He's going to be an accountable partner to Sarah that is going to work with him. Then we're going to have Mike that is going to work on 2 weeks after on creating a new job description about this type of roles. And then the celebration is just me summarizing the entire experience. Hey guys, it's crazy. When we entered this room, we had no clue on how we're going to improve the recruitment process. Look at us now. And then focusing really on big moment of the workshop. It's not a summary of every activity we've done. It's about really the main insights, the main decisions, the main ideas, and especially the commitment phase, because this is what is the most important?
I would add, I don't know if it's a seventh C or maybe it just fits it
Tell
under
me.
the sixth C, but I want to make a reference back to something you said, is when you were doing stand-up comedy, and I
Mhm.
reflect on this too. I also had a very small stint where I was like, oh, I'm going to do stand-up comedy. But I also had a very small stint where I was going to be a magician. Both magicians and comedians share this one thing that I think is very, very important, and it's the callback. You referenced the callback. So I'm going to call back to that and say maybe a seventh C, or it fits within the sixth C, is the callback. The power of a callback is what you've done in the celebration mode, which is remind them of why they came into the room in the first place. If you think of a stand-up comic or a magician, the magician who lays an envelope on the front of the stage and references doing that and comes back to it at the very end and says, hey, you remember there was an envelope on the stage? The comedian who calls back to the first joke they made, this last joke gets the biggest laugh because everyone's like, whoa, that was the first thing. It's something that I've started to incorporate in my design, is calling back to what happened at the start, at the very start of the day. Either a connection thing that happened, a comment that was made. I take notes of stuff early on and I try to make sure I do a callback to that. Is that something you're very intentional about, doing callbacks? Because I think there's something to that.
So first, I think it's brilliant. I love that. And for geeking it even more on the callback, the callback joke is, even if the joke is not strong, just because you're doing the callback, you have this, as you said, this magician effect. Wow. It's so funny because it's just referring it to the first bit. And of course you want to use that. So when I'm deep diving into some of the connection activities I have, actually my goal is just to create elements for the callback jokes that I will make, not only at the end, but during the entire workshop. And when you do those callback jokes, what does it happen? And sometimes for me, it's really joke. It's just like, oh, it listened. This connection activity was not just there as as a to-do in his stack list. It really connected with us. So they feel heard, they feel seen. Then imagine I do something like an activity like hopes and fears. Like, what do you hope to get from this workshop? What are you afraid to not get, or what are your concerns? A good celebration moment could be like, okay, guys, remember we did this? Let's come back to the whiteboard and check each of the sticky notes. And then you can show them that you really did magic because you achieved all the hopes and none of the fears happened. As you said, the biggest magic is really the first moments and the end. But I think in general, you know, it is like my vibe is bringing this more fun, and like we can have fun while doing serious stuff. So this is how I use callback a lot, but sometimes it can be just more serious, like the example I gave and what you suggested.
This is going to be a callback to the experience we've had. And if we really think about what we've talked about, we talked about our own progression as we grew into the field, the reason, the need for the floaties, the driving the different vehicles, the collection of the Pokemon. We had all of these different things that we went through to get to a point where we've created a structure that kind of hits very clear goals and outcomes. We have understood the why, and that design should be something that listeners should spend more attention to than maybe the activities themselves. And I want to thank you, Mehdi, for joining us on the podcast to discuss all of this. If you want to learn more, you can find more about him in the links in the description. You can check them all out below. And that's lots of ways you can find Mehdi. Thank you, Mehdi.
Thank you very much, Phil, for having me. If I may just close with this, like, I think the value of design is really about understanding better the brief of the client and exploring different directions. And just like your brain, I'm going to use this activity, I'm going to use that. Like, just like you're exploring all the direction. So that when you go into the room, you will be more comfortable with everything that's going to happen. Because there is chances that your agenda is not going to work. But because your brain already explores some of the direction, I think you will be able to just improvise better. And then because you mentioned Pokemon again, like imagine I already have a Charizard and it's the only Pokemon I will use because in French there are other Pokemon names. It's like, I have a Charizard. I know my Charizard is really strong. Why would I pick another one? Like this is like, I have my big team of Pokemons to win the league. So then it's just a combination of the right Pokemon based on the situation I have.
Thank you, Mehdi. This has been a lot of fun.
Likewise, Phil.